ADHD brain, in many ways, is not just distracted. It's tired, and it is trying to keep itself awake through hyperactivity, through hyperfocus on the things that are very rewarding, through all kinds of stimming activities.
Right.
So it's a tired brain, and the reason it's tired is sometimes because of sleep disordered breathing. So if a child has ADHD and they are breathing through their mouth while they sleep, to me, we don't proceed until we have addressed that breathing.
Oh, wow.
Because that's an exhausted brain because it's never getting proper oxygenation overnight and deep sleep.
Today, I'm bringing another friend onto the show. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ellen Vora. She's a board-certified psychiatrist, an acupuncturist, and a yoga teacher who takes a functional, whole-person approach to mental health. Rather than suppressing symptoms with medication, she focuses on root causes by integrating physical health, sleep, nutrition, digestion, thought patterns, relationships, community, and connection with nature and purpose.
We're taught that crying is somehow the wrong thing to do, a weakness, a burden on the people around us. But I think we've gotten that completely wrong. This is the wisdom of the body saying you need a release right now. Tears contain something called ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, a component of our stress cascade, but only emotional tears. So if you're cutting an onion and tearing up, those tears do not contain ACTH.
Oh my God.
So emotional tears really are a medicinal process. It's a way the body disburdens our bloodstream of our stress response.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
She is the author of The Anatomy of Anxiety, where she offers a holistic framework for understanding anxiety, not just as a label, but as a response rooted in physiology and life context.
What we know about a medication like a benzo is that even though in the short term, it's actually quite effective.
Right.
Like, does it help with a panic attack in the moment? It does. But then in the medium and long term, it seems to exacerbate the original problem. And I've seen far too many people take their medication and not know to attribute their daily panic attacks to the interdose withdrawal. That when they're coming down off that
Just
medication.
day to day, like literally day to day.
Right. And
Okay.
so I think these are the ways that just being a little bit more cavalier about reaching for pharmaceuticals can actually introduce more mental fragility, more panic, more suicidality. And I think it might.
Okay, before we jump in, quick health check. Are you subscribed yet? You'd be surprised how many people forget the one click that actually helps them feel better every week. Go ahead, hit it. Around here, we turn science into self-care you can actually use. Let's get started. All right, it's such a gift to be able to do these episodes with friends and be able to kind of shed light on some of the incredible work, that so many of you are doing. So I am so thrilled to have you here today, Ellen. It's a joy. I know Ellen from a lot of different venues, but many of you may not know, but she's a psychiatrist. She's worked in the anxiety space for a while. Her last book was The Anatomy of Anxiety. We're going to jump right into anxiety because it is the #1 mental health condition out there. I think it's amongst kids, women, men. I mean, I think it's an epidemic. What's going on?
What's going on with that? And thanks for having me. It's good to be here. So I think there's so much that contributes to why it's such an epidemic. And I see it as two main avenues or pathways that lead us into so much anxiety. And the second one, I'll kind of go out of
Yeah.
order. The second one is the one that's easier to hear and easier to swallow. And it's the one that most people resonate with, which is to say, we come by our anxiety honestly. We are viscerally connected to the suffering in the world. We feel climate anxiety. We feel anxiety around democracy. We feel anxiety around all of these very real global events. And we're feeling that. And so that's what I call in my book true anxiety. It's our inner compass. It's nudging us. It's saying, pay attention. Something is out of alignment here. And it's asking us to show up and help course correct something in the world. Could be in our personal lives, our communities, the world at large. And that's the one we all think is the cause of our anxiety. And I do think it's attributable. Much of our anxiety does have to do with this our inner compass, but not all of it. And I think that that's the kind of anxiety that's actually harder to resolve in the near term It's where I like to focus more of my energy with patients is what I think we can solve right away.
So you're actually that's interesting because you're seeing it you're kind of framing anxiety less as this is my problem as more of like this is a macro problem. It's a cultural problem. Is
Mhm.
sort of what you're saying based on everything happening around us currently.
That's right. True anxiety is not something to pathologize. It's not what's wrong with you. This is what's right with us when we are able
Mm.
to viscerally connect to what's wrong around us. And so the fact that we live in a
That's a
world,
completely different way to talk about anxiety.
yeah,
Because most people walk around with anxiety saying, you know, like, I'm not enough or something's wrong with me or, you know, or I have this regimen to manage it or whatever it is, right? Is seen as a negative. But
yes.
you're saying, no, it's good. It's because you're intuitive. It's because you're connected. It's because you can't box out into a hole and block everything else out that's happening with you.
Yeah.
That is fascinating to me.
And our world tells us, why are you being so sensitive? And we blame ourselves. There's a lot of negative self talk that comes with it. But really, if someone has a lot of true anxiety, I believe it's a sign of a wide open antenna and an intact heart. And
Wow.
if you have a wide open antenna, we do need to reframe. We need to recognize this is not something to pathologize. This is a gift. But it is also a liability because we live in a loud world. So if you have a wide open antenna, it's not something wrong with you, but it is something that requires tremendous care.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so wide open antenna. We better settle in here. So
Strap on your
we
seatbelts.
are we're gonna be at this thing. Okay, so wide open antenna. Let's talk about that for a minute. Someone listening or watching us is like, what does she mean? Can you help frame that a little bit? What do you mean? How can someone identify with the fact that they may be a little bit more open and receiving more input than somebody else?
Yeah. Well, I'll first acknowledge if you're not someone with a wide open antenna, that's also not something to
Right.
pathologize. I think that humanity needs to represent the full spectrum of this. We need someone to be in the OR and remain cool under pressure. We need a pilot. We need someone who can remain unflappable. And that's not bad. We need all of this represented in the human genome. But we also need someone who can't make it through the evening news without feeling like they're about to cry, because we
Mhm.
need that person too who's going to stay so viscerally connected to the suffering around them that they can't help but respond to that.
Mm.
And so if you have a wide open antenna, I do just want people to embrace that, to recognize, even though our world says you're being so sensitive, this is a superpower. That's an overused term. It's gotten pretty diluted, but it is, in a way, this preternatural ability to pick up on data that other people aren't picking up on,
Mm.
whether that's coming through a very sophisticated neurologic system, whether it's something more supernatural, who really knows? But I think some of us are taking in information that other people are not aware of.
Well, what's the answer for those type of folks then? Like, are they supposed to block off? Are they supposed to shut down? We can't all retreat. I know some of us like won't scroll at certain
Yeah.
times or won't watch the news consistently. But if we're going to stay in the context that, anxiety is your sort of visceral, experience of the universe and what's happening, what does somebody do?
Yeah. So I'm not going to advocate for blocking off, though I know some people sometimes have to do that in the near term just to cope.
Yeah.
But I think of it like we all need to brush our teeth and hopefully we all floss. But if you have a wide open antenna, you have a few more daily self care practices that are required to keep you intact. And it's grounding practices. I think we need more time unplugged, in stillness, in silence, ideally in nature.
Mm.
Maybe you're doing the dishes and you choose not to listen to a podcast. You just allow for silence or wordless music so that your brain can defragment and close down some tabs. I think that we need to move a lot of emotion. So, crying, I think tears are very medicinal if you feel a lot on behalf of humanity. We're taught that crying is somehow the wrong thing to do, a weakness, a burden on the people around us. But I think we've gotten that completely wrong. Um,
I love that. Tears are medicinal,
yeah.
not weakness.
No, this is the wisdom of the body saying you need a release right now, and it offers it to us. But then culturally, we've been conditioned to suppress it. The minute we
Mm.
start to cry, we apologize, and then we try to make it as small and brief as possible. When in fact, I think we need to get better at crying in a bigger, more complete, blubbery, ugly way. We, it's an interesting data on tears is that. Um, Tears contain something called ACTH,
Mhm.
adrenocorticotropic hormone, a component of our stress cascade, but only emotional tears. So if you're cutting an onion and tearing up, those tears do not contain
Oh
ACTH.
my
So
gosh.
emotional tears really are a medicinal process. It's a way the body disburdens our bloodstream of our stress response.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so we need to cry more if we
Yeah.
have a wide open antenna. And I think we do need boundaries and something like not looking at the phone first thing in the morning, right before bed, putting some parameters around doom scrolling and treating certain times of the day as sacred is very protective. Because I think when someone is so viscerally connected, they're at risk of getting burned out. It's like empathy overload.
Mm.
But ultimately that empathy, it's driven by a desire to want to make a difference, to be a force
Yeah.
for good in the world,
Yeah.
but we can't carry out that work if we are strung out, bleary-eyed, underslept, and where our attention gets pulled to every new cause every single day.
Mm.
So we need a lot of discipline around it so that we can stay intact, rested, clear, and we can carry out our highest contribution.
Is there, and especially as a psychiatrist, right? Like most people put anxiety in the box of this is a psychological disorder, right? And I know you've reframed it to say, this is a person who's very in tuned with their environment and things like that. But how much is just like chemistry or physiological, right? Like you're low in magnesium, or your progesterone's off. So how does somebody differentiate between, like, this is a chemistry equation versus this is an issue with, just being open?
Yeah, so you brought me sort of to the I went out of order, but
Yeah,
the
that's
true
okay, yeah.
anxiety is also not a psychological condition. I think that that's a sign of strength. You're connecting to it
Right.
strong. But then I do think that there's a lot that's driving our anxiety that we do want to fix. But I don't believe that it's what we've been taught. What we've been
Mm,
taught is that anxiety is a genetic chemical imbalance.
right.
It's your genes,
Yep.
it's your serotonin, it's all happening right here from the neck up,
Yeah.
and that if you're anxious, you have this low serotonin, so no big deal, correct it with a pill, and if that's the narrative we've been given. If that worked for more people, I could buy into that.
Right.
But I am sitting here at the front lines. I've been in practice for 14 years and it doesn't work enough of the time.
Mm,
And so I see the people that wash up to shore that have tried that approach and they've tried this medication and then they increased the dose and then they added an augmentation
right.
strategy and they start to feel like, well, I have a chemical imbalance. It's supposed to be corrected with a pill. I'm still suffering, even though I'm highly medicated,
Right.
highly therapized. So people start to despair. They start to think maybe I'm uniquely beyond repair. It works for
Mm.
everybody else, but not for me. And I don't want anybody believing that they're stuck or that it's hopeless in that way. And I don't think it's true. So when someone's anxious, I think of it as this has modifiable root causes. Sometimes it's all that true anxiety. It's all the psychospiritual ways that we're perceiving what's out of balance. But often it is simply that something is out of balance in the physical body, not in a way that's your genetic destiny,
Mhm.
just a temporary, stupid physiologic state of imbalance from aspects of modern life. Blood sugar crashes,
Yeah.
a bad night of sleep, a hangover, an extra cold brew coffee, we were up late doom scrolling, these things that generate a stress response in the body. And then we subjectively experience that stress response as anxiety. But none of that needs to be happening. We can identify the root cause, address it, and eliminate all of this unnecessary suffering.
What would you say to people who may not even be dialed into that diagnosis of anxiety right now, but they're just experiencing things in their physical body,
Yeah.
maybe even in their mental or emotional bodies? How would they know? And is it even necessary? How would they know, or is it even necessary to call it anxiety? Like,
Yeah.
what can they kind of recognize?
This comes up a lot, and because I'm talking about this body-mind connection,
Yeah.
and so sometimes someone will kind of come at my philosophy on anxiety from the other direction, and they'll kinda say, like, "I'm having this stomach pain or this muscle
Right.
tension,"
Right.
and I can tell that what someone wants me to say is, "Oh, those physical symptoms are actually anxiety."
I'm so curious what you're gonna say.
But I
So,
guess I'm not really in the
yeah.
business of putting that word in someone's mouth if they're not already subjectively identifying with it. I don't think it's the greatest harm,
Necessary.
but
Yeah.
since we must misunderstand the concept so much, I feel like it just adds more complexity to the picture. I
Mhm.
want relief from their suffering.
Mm.
And when we're thinking about like the gut brain connection,
Mhm.
so much of the time that conversation is focused on the fact it's like a top down communication that if
Right.
we're stressed, if we're
Right.
anxious, it will impact our gut.
Right.
So if someone is saying I have all these digestive issues, I have IBS, and then someone says it's actually just your anxiety, they're like, oh, it's my anxiety. But that doesn't really give us a path to relief from suffering, because that takes us right back to where we started, which is, so I guess you should try Lexapro and
Mhm.
then go down that journey. Whereas I think that I'm more interested in the bottom up
Mm.
part of that conversation,
Okay.
which is to say, yeah, your gut is unwell, because whose isn't in modern life? We've been subjected to multiple courses of antibiotics and chlorinated tap water, and we don't consume fermented foods, and we're not playing in soil. So we're missing microbes, we're missing diversity, we're consuming Roundup, it's inflaming our gut lining. We have all of these ways that our is compromised, and that is contributing to the anxiety and the stress. So I like that because it's the easier entry point. If the gut is unwell, let's focus on healing the gut. We can do that, as opposed to if we're anxious and that's contributing to digestive symptoms, that's a long road ahead. And
Mhm.
it's often not even a very effective pathway to finding relief from symptoms. So I prefer to look at it as there's two-way communication between the gut and the brain. And the easier and more effective place to start is the gut. Yeah.
So do you start with the probably the greatest physiological pain point? Is that kind of like a good way of people to think about it? Like if they're having more gut symptoms versus more like cognitive symptoms versus sleep,
Yeah.
how like what's a kind of a sort of a way for them to begin?
It is different with every
Yeah,
single patient
absolutely.
based
Yeah.
on a million
Right.
considerations and often just what are they able to start with?
Right.
Because
Right.
one person wants to take supplements, someone else needs to get into bed earlier, and it just
Right.
varies. But I think what I've learned over time is that there are a few things I reach for that seem to be approachable enough that are somewhat universally impactful
Okay.
and can be a quick win and then get someone down a path where they can make more changes. I like someone to keep the phone out of the bedroom at bedtime. Just that alone,
Yeah.
setting up your charger somewhere else in your home, and then around, let's say, 9 o'clock, you kiss your phone goodnight, like,
Yeah.
phone,
Bye
I love you, I'm gonna
bye.
miss you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You enter your bedroom without your phone, you read Thich Nhat Hanh or something life affirming, and then you fall asleep. And that works on multiple dimensions because then you're not seeing the blue spectrum light of the screen, suppressing melatonin, disrupting the circadian rhythm. We're not doom scrolling, which we live in the attention economy,
Yeah.
which means that this has been designed to be addictive. This is
Yeah.
endless scroll. So we don't ever have a stopping cue that tells us, hey, this might be a good time to put the phone away and go to bed. We scroll endlessly. So we stay up later. We don't get good
Is
sleep.
that your like number one thing? Is it technology and the blue light? Like number one thing if you need a starting point.
It's probably
Start
that
there,
or like getting a squatty potty.
Wait,
Yeah.
why a squatty potty?
The squatty potty is this stool that goes
Yeah.
at the base of the toilet, and it helps us restore our anatomical position for elimination.
Right?
And that is so impactful for so many people. And it's I like an intervention that is inexpensive, non-invasive, has biologic plausibility for why it works, and it can change your life.
Mm.
Squatty potty and blue blocking glasses and
We're
keeping the
we're
phone out of the
set.
bedroom.
We're
Yeah.
set. All right. Well, I do want to ask, in all seriousness, between the anxiety toolbox that's out there, which is growing and massive, and probably more things are being added as we speak, we've got everything from mindfulness and meditation work, apps that go with that, right?
Yeah.
To supplements, even I've, mentioned so many of them over the years, GABA, theanine, magnesium, I could go on, to medications,
Mhm.
to acupuncture, craniosacral therapy. Now we have PMF mats, grounding sheets. I'm sure I've forgotten so many, and then we have, of course, the world of pharmaceuticals. We've got a massive anxiety toolbox. Talk to us about how we need to think about that toolbox, how we need to navigate it to not get overwhelmed when you already have anxiety, and what is the role of pharmaceuticals in this equation?
Yeah. So much of that toolbox. And it's interesting. I'm curious how listeners feel when they hear that. I, as someone who professionally doles out these tools, familiar with
Yeah,
this toolbox, like I kind of have to catch my breath
right,
after hearing it, right? It's
right. Even
overwhelming.
as I say it, I'm just like, oh my gosh,
Gives us
yeah,
anxiety. And so I don't none of that is my first line. And I think a lot of those tools, they're all useful. That many of them have evidence to back
right.
up their utility. They're all in my armamentarium. I'm reaching for each of those sometimes. But I think it overlooks the fundamentals and it still has the same narrative of if you're anxious, if we're taught that if you're anxious, it's a Zoloft deficiency
Right.
disorder, we've subbed in like it's an L-theanine deficiency
Right.
disorder, but it still assumes something broken about us. And I think the way I prefer to look at it is that your body works. Your body is pretty well designed. Exceptions are the knee joints and menopause, but it is a
Mhm.
pretty good design.
Mhm.
And if it is not well, then we have to look at the inputs. What are we not giving our body that helps us feel intact? What are we putting in that's getting us out of balance? And so I don't even want to start band aiding until we've
Gotcha.
addressed the foundation. And the foundation is primarily sleep, nourishment, and movement.
Mm.
And you could add a kind of an eye towards the psycho-spiritual needs we
Mhm.
have, like community,
Mhm.
like a sense of purpose in our lives, connection to nature, but that is the next chapter. But I think even just looking at sleep, nourishment, and movement and making sure those are locked in before we start reaching for supplements and pharmaceuticals.
And what is your sort of experience with the pharmaceuticals out of curiosity? Like, when do you feel like it's a right time to grab one of those?
I feel like it's the right time. Uh, the way I look at them is that they can be a bridge, they can be an outstretched hand that pulls someone out of a very dark place and helps them get onto solid ground so that they can do the
Right.
practices that get sleep and nourishment locked in. But I think that their efficacy is disappointing. And I I took an oath of first do no harm.
Mhm.
And what I can no longer feel in my bones is that starting someone on a pharmaceutical is my best attempt at mitigating
Oh,
harm.
wow.
I'm quick to follow that up by saying I'm a psychiatrist. I prescribe these
Right.
medications. I don't have any dogmatic philosophy against them. And if someone's listening right now and taking them, which I'm sure
I'm sure there are.
a
Yeah.
majority perhaps, um, it you shouldn't second guess that or look back. The question is it helping you? And if it is, great.
Right.
And if it isn't, then I want you to know you're not stuck and we have so many ways to support you. But the thing that has me most hesitant about starting someone on a
Yes.
medication is actually the withdrawal process.
Yes, I know. I've witnessed that firsthand on patients.
And it's represented and discussed. We are not taught about this. Even psychiatrists are not taught about this. We are taught to say that if someone goes off their medication and they become symptomatic, we call that a relapse.
Mhm.
What I have now come to appreciate is that we can't even speak to whether or not someone's in a relapse because in that moment they are in withdrawal.
Right.
And that is the lion's share of what's creating their symptoms.
So I'll never forget the day I had, it was early in practice, in my practice years, and I had a patient on venlafaxine,
Yeah.
and she pulled herself off, without guidance, and just thought like, "Okay, I'm better. I can do this now." And showed up in my exam room on the floor, like writhing around with her husband. Like her husband was just, I don't know what to do with her. The withdrawal was so severe. So, again, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but as a practicing psychiatrist, where many feel like the greatest criticism, we have of psychiatry today, to be completely honest. I think the greatest criticism of psychiatry is that it's pharmaceutical based, that you go there to get a prescription
Yeah.
versus going to a psychologist or a therapist or somebody else, right? What would you say to that? Like, what would you say to the field of psychiatry in general and where it's trending or heading? Are they there with you in seeing that there's a place for it? But so many patients, Ellen, like to this day, come in, oh, yeah, I've been on Zoloft for like 20 years, or I've been on Prozac since I was 15, or you know what I mean? Like they have
Yeah.
this long history with the medications,
Yeah.
So where is the field of psychiatry headed? What do we do with people that have been on medications for such a long period of time?
Yeah. I mean, I do think that my field, if we are not in crisis, we should consider ourselves to be in crisis. But I think that I want to give grace in a couple different ways.
Yeah.
One is that I have yet to think when I see individual practitioners, I know these people. They're my colleagues. We went to
Right.
med school with them, right?
Yeah.
Residency.
hmm
These are very hardworking, very caring
No fault
individuals.
on the individuals. I'm talking about the system in which we were all trained,
Yeah.
the practice of this. Like, what will it take to shift the field to a different place?
Yeah.
Doctors are amazing. I've always said that. I don't think I've met a doctor that went into medicine without any other purpose other than I wanna help people and serve. This
Yeah.
is not a profession that you go into, like, to make a quick buck or, like, or any of those things. So, this is not about the physicians, it's about the field and the mill that we're all put into,
Yeah.
right? And told that this is the way we should be practicing.
We
That's
are
kind of
it's
where
our
I'm
training,
yeah,
and we're cogs in a machine that's much bigger than any individual and maybe has some at least financially motivated interests that are
right,
influencing our clinical decision making.
yeah,
But I think that, just take many steps back, this all started as I think a very earnest attempt to help find relief for people. And they
right,
saw tuberculosis meds,
yeah,
modulating serotonin, creating relief from depression. They're like, oh, this is
yeah,
something we should pursue. And it came with this transition from a very morally stigmatizing approach to mental health, like
yeah,
it's a relationship with your mother, it's a moral infirmity,
right,
to the disease model of mental health that
yeah,
said, no, never mind, we got that wrong. It's your genes, it's your serotonin, which came with a lot of alleviation of the stigma. It basically said, "This isn't your fault. This is
mhm.
your genes, and it's an inevitability."
Mhm.
And that was the spirit of that was beautiful. Where we are now is that that narrative only gets you so far. If the meds work for you, you're okay. If the meds don't work for you, that narrative actually can create quite a lot of hopelessness.
Mm.
And it's not even our most accurate narrative about mental health anyway. And then it really sets us up to make a lot of money for the pharmaceutical
Yeah,
industry.
yeah,
And so to me, mental health is the body out of balance,
yeah.
and mental health is physical health. And I just want someone to experience relief from suffering. I think of it all like a mountain.
Mhm.
Healing is this summiting a mountain. Getting to the top of the mountain means you're feeling well, you're
Yeah.
hopeful, you have energy, clear thinking, you're thriving in your life. And we're currently saying there are these two paths up this mountain. It's psychotherapy and medication. And for some people, those paths get them all the way to the top, and that's a victory. But there are many people who hit a dead end and
Mm.
then hit multiple dead ends trying to take different approaches to this. And what I really want to encourage the conversation to expand to is bushwhacking.
Yeah.
Bushwhacking up this mountain, that you can get to the dead end of meds and therapy, and you can say, well, there's actually this other little, not so well worn path over here that looks at the role of inflammation or the
Yeah.
role of sleep apnea or mouth breathing
Mhm.
or vitamin B12 or and. And
Mhm.
so when someone is getting stuck, I just want them to know there are other ways
There are
up
other
this
ways
mountain.
there are other ways to deal with this. I wanna talk about kids for a second.
Yeah.
I think, I have an 18-year-old, as I told you, is headed off to college. She has friends. We've been observing and watching them over the last probably, 6 or 7 years, and the prevalence of anxiety amongst her community, especially amongst her girls, is
Mm,
pretty high,
yeah.
and we see it in practice as well. So, what's happening with our children,
Mhm.
and their anxiety levels and now the prescribing to them. And, I share the story often, like she was going through a pretty dark spot in middle school. And, you know, it was really due to social I don't wanna say isolation, that's not a fair word, but, like, sort of social displacement, maybe that's a better word.
Yeah.
And I think that was the root for her, and just kind of feeling older than the people around her and not really finding her people, whatever we wanna call it, that's a story for her to tell one day. But bottom line is we had already tried a few things, and I almost out of pseudo desperation, I agreed to have her started on a very low dose anxiety medication. And then I think a week or so later, it was like my 50th birthday party. So I went out of town for the first time. The last time I was out of town with her was when she was like 18 months old. And sure enough, within 24 to 48 hours, she had a horrific reaction. So it
Mm.
scared us both away from any type of anxiety medication moving forward. But, I see these kids all the time in our practices and in our communities that are on these medications that have a diagnosis of anxiety. I don't feel good about it for our children. I feel like we need to be thinking about this differently. What would you say to that?
A lot. So
I set this one up. So
let me
anyhow.
see if because I have
All
like
right.
6 bullet
All
points I'm gonna
right.
share.
Got
So
it.
one is that
Edit, edit, edit.
the youth have an intact antenna, right?
Yeah.
So like they are feeling we're all so old and concretized, and they're feeling on behalf of humanity what's like the way our trajectory is off, and how if you
Right.
play this out over months, years, centuries, like we
Right.
are headed for destruction. They're sensing that. They have a lot of true anxiety, and let's honor that. And yet, I think there is so much what I would call false or physical or avoidable anxiety happening in young people. Some of that is the work of Jonathan Haidt and Jean Twenge, and just screens and social media has been so destructive. And it
Detrimental.
hit their brains at a time when they're still forming, wiring, and in a way that I think will just continue to see the devastation of that. And it's just horrifying. And I don't think anyone did anything wrong here.
Yeah.
I like the analogy of it's a car was invented before seatbelts were invented.
Yeah.
So we were driving around without seatbelts for a while. And now we're like, oh, this is a dangerous, this has utility. We're not going back to the horse and buggy, but we need some safety measures.
Mhm.
I think that there's also a way that younger generations have been incubated in a very inflammatory environment. And so I think that physiologically they're missing certain nutrients, certain microbes. I think that there's a lot that's out of balance. The psychiatric medication piece, I heard on your podcast that the United States, we take 80% of the world's pharmaceuticals. And I imagine, like, if you're facing when a child is in crisis, you'll do anything. It's out of
Right.
desperation. You just want them to be okay. And this is what the world says. This is what it means to do something about it, is to see a psychiatrist, get put on something. And I think we just need to approach that initial decision with so much care,
Mhm.
because I think we have an attitude of let's give it a try. Let's see if it helps. If it doesn't help, no harm, no foul. And I think that the tricky thing about these medications is that sometimes, in a way that's unpredictable, it can cause harm. And
Mhm.
it can, I think, entrench a certain amount of fragility. I think the withdrawal from going off a medication is a serious issue that we need to be talking about much
Yeah.
more, and how to mitigate it and how to approach it. But even something called interdose withdrawal matters. And that's where, let's say someone's taking a benzo like Xanax or
Right.
Klonopin, and they take their medication in the morning, and then they're suddenly on kind of pharmacokinetic curve.
Mhm.
And at a certain point, their body's coming down off of that medication. For some people, that can feel um, th- devastating. People can feel really off in that state. They can feel hopeless. They can have dark thoughts. They can have suicidal thoughts. They can feel like they want to crawl out of their skin. They're just
Yeah.
irritable. They can't sleep. And they can have panic attacks. So, what we know about a medication like a benzo is that even though in the short term, it's actually quite effective.
Right.
Like, does it help with a panic attack in the moment? It does.
Yeah.
But then in the medium and long term, it seems to exacerbate the original problem. And I've seen far too many people take their medication and not know to attribute their daily panic attacks to the interdose withdrawal, that
Mm.
when they're coming down off
Just
that
day to
medication.
day, like literally day to day.
Right. And
Okay.
so I think these are the ways that just being a little bit more cavalier about reaching for pharmaceuticals can actually introduce more mental fragility, more panic, more suicidality. And I think it might play an underappreciated role in the ways that to be a teenager is hard,
Yeah.
really hard. It's
Yeah.
gotten harder. And then I think we might have inadvertently trying to help created a whole other thing for people to be grappling with, which is the pinball game that's set up by the pharmaceuticals
And
themselves.
then to couple that, like, where do the ADHD medications fit into this equation?
Hooey. I guess I'm just not going to make friends today. So
That's no, we need to be honest. We need to have honest conversations. We need to educate people
yeah,
because, you're walking out of an appointment with a couple of different pharmaceuticals. I know people listening to the show want a different approach, but like I also want a guided approach,
yeah,
right? Like we want like that middle road. So what is that middle road?
yeah,
Again, not to share my own personal stories over and over again, but again, same daughter has ADD, has ADHD,
yeah,
right? Refused to put her on medicine, refused to put her on medicine, refused to put her on medicine until she hit her junior year because she drove that decision. She's like,
yeah,
everyone around me is on it. It's unfair. I'm struggling. And sure enough, we put her on it that year and like her grades were better than they've ever been
yeah,
throughout
yeah,
her, the
yeah.
last few years of her schooling and probably made a difference with how she felt about herself and her self-esteem.
Yes,
So I'm not
that's
trying to
right.
take any of that away. However, she does ride the highs and lows of that interdosing that you're talking
Yeah,
about. In fact, there was a holiday season last year where I think she didn't take it because she just didn't want to take it. She was a freaking nightmare to be around,
yeah,
crying on the floor, crying about an outfit, crying about, and it was just like, okay, what boat are we on today? Is sort of how I felt as a
yeah.
parent. So again, like I'm so empathetic to kids and parents in these positions, but what are we supposed to do?
With ADHD and stimulants, I don't think there is an easy answer. There's not a one size fits all. Um, I'm going to, in a moment, talk about some physiologic ways we can support ADHD behaviors, but I don't mean it as a denial of the very
Right.
real
Right.
genetic component to ADHD
Right.
is a
It's
real
real.
entity. It's
Yeah.
happening,
Yeah.
um, and I think that sometimes stimulants help someone enormously, can influence the trajectory of whether they have a sense of their own identity as I'm a mess up. I'm not performing well in school. I'm always disorganized. I'm always losing things. I'm always messing.
Right.
Like people can
Right.
take on this sense of themselves, and then that's shaping their belief of who they can be in the world. And we
Yeah.
don't want that. So sometimes the medication can really rescue someone from that. And it comes with the interdose withdrawal. It comes with the come down. It comes with the sometimes appetite suppression during the day and dehydration and then irritability at the end of the day, maybe impacting sleep, maybe creating anxiety that requires other medications. So there's no easy answer there. I think that a kind of like to me a no-brainer approach to ADHD is to at least start with all the physiologic support we can do at the beginning, and it may or may not solve the problem. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But when I think about ADHD, I first think about sleep.
Mm.
And when I think about sleep, I think about breathing. So, what I mean by that is that an ADHD brain, in many ways, it's not just distracted, um, it's tired and it is trying to keep itself awake through hyperactivity, through hyper focus on the things that are very rewarding, through all kinds of stimming activities. And
Right.
so it's a tired brain. And the reason it's tired is sometimes because of sleep disordered breathing. So if a child has ADHD and they are breathing through their mouth while they sleep, to me, we don't proceed until we have addressed that breathing
Oh, wow.
because that's an exhausted brain because it's never getting proper oxygenation overnight and deep sleep. And so all of those ADHD behaviors during the day are in many ways just the tired brain compensating. And you want to get someone breathing through the nose, getting deep restorative sleep every night, and then we'll talk about the behaviors during the
Mm.
day. But often that can transform how someone shows up during the day. Inflammation, nourishment, certain micronutrients, zinc,
Really building that
protein,
foundation
it all
first.
matters.
Yeah.
And we live in this moment where Kids navigate a minefield of food dyes and preservatives. And even
Mm-hmm.
though that has become political,
I know.
a very famous doctor called it moving deck chairs around on the Titanic.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
I
I
like
think
that
that,
actually.
well, yes, I do
Yeah.
too. But but I think it does matter. And is it our single most important public health issue? No.
Yeah.
But right now, even like I'm a very proactive, health conscious parent. And does my daughter go a week without consuming Red 40? Probably not,
No.
because it's
Yeah.
just in the waters we swim in, and
Right.
it's so hard to avoid. And those we do have data. The medical literature supports the fact that they can create hyperactivity and inattentive symptoms in children, preservatives as well. So the food matters. So if someone is chugging a blue drink and consuming Red 40 candy and breathing through their mouth at night, we want to address
Deal
that
with that
before we start the
first.
medication that has pros and cons. But I like the things that only have pros. Addressing those things, for the most part, can only benefit, has side benefits rather than side effects.
Okay, I want to ask one more question about pharmaceuticals and I promise we'll move on. Do you believe at all? I've actually given this some thought. I don't know that I've actually practiced it, but you know how we're microdosing GLP-1s and microdosing different things. Is there an opportunity to microdose pharmaceuticals? So, microdoses, for example, of an SSRI or microdoses of an ADHD medication rather than these larger doses,
Yeah.
could that be a place where there's intersection of these worlds?
I think that's so interesting. I would say for a lot of these things, a microdose would be better than a macrodose. I
Mhm.
do think a lot of these medications, our dosing is based on like adult male
Right.
physiology. It's probably wildly inappropriate for a cycling female body, for a child's body. We kind of had that oopsie that happened with Ambien, where
Mhm.
women were taking the regular dose, but then having more traffic accidents and fatalities from that. And it turns out that's an inappropriate dose for female
Right.
physiology. And
Right.
there's the fact that in the 70s, 80s, even the boom of the 90s, where we're developing all these drugs, women weren't included in the studies
Right.
because it was believed that our physiology is too complicated and that might muddy the research and influence the effect of a medication. And
Yeah.
the interesting thing is, it turns out it does. But that's a nice thing
But
to
that's what we
know
need to know.
before we release a
Right.
medication
Right.
into the world
Right.
where half the population does in fact have this complicated physiology. So microdosing pharmaceuticals, I'm open to it.
Yeah. I might play with it some.
I think that I think my training is speaking up and saying
Right.
like that wouldn't be a therapeutic dose. So would it even be effective? Are you getting the downsides without the upsides? And I don't know, but it's worth
Exploration potentially.
some brave patience. Yeah.
Because we have in practice, we've microdosed, for example, metformin or microdosed oral minoxidil for women with hair loss,
Yeah.
or microdosed HRT. I mean, as I was talking to you, I was like, I wonder if there's an opportunity there. So while somebody's working on the lifestyle pieces and some of these environmental pieces, is this the way to support so it's easier to take it away?
It's a
So
really
we
good
have
idea.
less of that withdrawal effect. Just curious. But you brought something up that has struck me. So I've got to share just a fun story. I love documentaries, I love period pieces. So, guilty pleasure when I'm by myself is I watched the Victoria. I don't know if you've seen that
I
documentary
haven't
on
seen it.
Queen Victoria. It's not really a documentary, it's actually a show. But there is a scene in that show where she's in her power, she's reigning, she was a very successful queen, however you feel about her reign. But her lady in waiting was having an affair, and her husband, because he had more power in the court or whatever else, found out about it and called in doctors who gave her a diagnosis of hysterical female hysteria, and that she was hysterical and she was taken and put in a mental asylum, right? That was the nature of the treatment of women's health in that time frame. I think fast forward today you just mentioned the fact that women didn't enter clinical trials, I think, until 1970, and we really didn't enter in large volumes even up until more recently, right? People are still advocating for funding. This idea of the hysterical, anxious female, what do you have to say to that?
um, so let's put it this way. I mean, that kind of the way that was handled at that time,
Right.
the outrage that
Right.
I feel about that.
Right.
Because
But it's
that's
not so different. That's a fictionalized depiction, not to call anybody out, but just think back to a very famous political family that did a frontal lobotomy on one of their children and
Mhm.
put them in a mental asylum,
Yeah,
right? So a female, right?
yeah,
So this idea of you had to manage the woman, or the emotions of women were a sign of weakness or a
right,
sign of illness or a
right.
sign of disease, is something I feel like we're still not coming out from under.
Yeah. So maybe 3 bullet points on this one.
Okay.
How I think clearly. So I think that and like just to acknowledge that the patriarchal abhorrent aspect of it all, where it's
Right.
like, okay, this woman is not like this sense of entitlement and ownership over her behavior, and thinking if she's not doing what I want of her and staying loyal to this
Right.
person,
She's sick.
then she's sick, which
Right.
no.
Right.
But
Yeah.
and there's that is it Krishnamurti? We often attribute this quote to him of like, to be unwell in a sick society, like this actually can
Mm-hmm.
be a sign of like you're having the appropriate reaction.
Yeah.
And so I think women's hysteria and outrage is often a very appropriate reaction to having a boot on our necks, and just bucking all of the ways that there is still systemic sexism, misogyny, oppression, still very much constantly, more so with each intersecting layer of marginalization.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we still don't tolerate women's anger. Women still have plenty of conditioning around you should be smiling, you should
Right.
be selflessly sacrificing.
Right.
And I think that I'll kind of tip my hat towards two aspects of this that I think a lot about. One, let me park it for a second. I want to talk about the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle, but I will say I think there is a false anxiety piece. This is so uncomfortable to talk about, but um like some of the treatments for hysteria was a vibrator, was an
Yeah.
orgasm. And I
Yeah.
think that it's a false mood that I rarely talk about, but I do think that sexual expression and satisfaction is actually does influence our mood
Mm-hmm.
and our ability to find our baseline and to be centered. And I think we actually do need to acknowledge that. And this is for men and women. And
Right.
so
Right. Well, it's the
um
release of oxytocin, right?
it's
Which
not
calms the
that's
nervous system
right.
down,
So
so.
we shouldn't be lobotomizing anybody and we
Right.
shouldn't be locking them away, but we probably do need a cultural conversation around like we don't get to suppress our creative urges. We don't get to suppress our sexual urges. Like this needs to be suppressed or it starts to create stagnation and
Mm.
imbalance.
Mm-hmm.
The luteal phase is the second half of the menstrual cycle, and it's towards the end when we are what we call PMSing,
Right.
and that has a lot of cultural baggage.
Mm-hmm.
We have been taught to think of ourselves as irritable, irrational, bitchy,
Yep.
even, and I think that we can get a exaggerated luteal phase. I think we can have a lot of imbalance in those times. That can be a check engine light of how do we help balance this physiology so it's not so extreme. But I also think that we're taught that that's the time we're irrational. And I
Mm-hmm.
actually think that's the time that we take off the rose tinted glasses and we're seeing a little more clearly. I think it's a time when we have less tolerance for BS. I think it's a time when an injustice that kind of fell off of our, like we're like Teflon to it in our follicular phase, suddenly we're like, no, that's not okay.
Yeah.
So I think that we need at least a reclamation of what feels important to us in our luteal phase rather than us dismissing that as
That's a
irrational. I
problem.
think we need to start to see like this is when I have a truth serum and I'm seeing this and this is not okay.
Mm.
And it's really the follicular phase when hormonally we're docile and flirty and play well in the sandbox. Like that's actually when we have a distorted view of reality. And it's the luteal phase when we are seeing all of the inconvenient truths.
Well, it's kind of like women that go into menopause, right? They no longer have tolerance and like bandwidth for what they used to put up with because they're
That's
no
right.
longer in this sort of like, oh, I need to procreate. Oh, I need to domesticate because like my estrogen's on the rise,
Right.
right? They're not doing that anymore.
That's right.
So it's probably why, what is it? The stereotype of the bitchy menopausal woman is
Mhm.
out there.
Mhm.
And you think about women and our intuition and our powers, and then you frame anxiety as this like macro issue, right, of an open antenna that we started talking about in the beginning, are we just cut off? Like, what would you say about women and where women are headed, when it comes to hopefully a future matriarchy?
Hopefully.
I can be optimistic.
You have
So,
to be. I
yeah.
think that, and a matriarchy won't look like a patriarchy with women at the top. It will
No,
look
because we
like
don't fundamentally function that
it's not
way.
about
So, yeah.
power. It's
Yeah.
actually about
Right.
taking care
Right.
of everyone who needs help.
So we go from like the hysterical female, right,
Yeah,
to the physiologically imbalanced female,
yeah,
right, to the bitchy female,
yeah,
who then we put the stamp of anxiety on it.
yeah.
Where are we headed with women and their mental and emotional health?
I think that so many of us women, we come out of the womb, we look around this world, and we understand the assignment, which is that what this world values is a certain kind of very left hemispheric rationality. Um, that's what we are taught to believe is intelligence. And I think what we do unconsciously is we perform a certain side of ourselves that plays by those rules. That
Mm.
says, okay, I like STEM, I'm good at math, I'm good at parallel parking. I'm not like the other girls. I am rational and chill
And
and
not
low maintenance,
emotional.
not
Yeah.
emotional,
Yeah.
PMS be damned. And it's basically we're doing that to get positive reinforcement from the world around us. We're doing that in order to have the career that's remunerative. We've totally bought in that left hemispheric, rational, these types of things, that has more value. And in the process, we unconsciously suppress this whole other side of ourselves, the side that is more the yin to the yang. It's
Mhm.
the receptive moon energy, non doing. It's the right hemisphere to the left hemisphere. It's the more intuitive, holistic, seeing the big
Mhm.
picture, engaging and grappling with the ineffable, not just the easily answered,
Yeah.
straightforward questions, but the gray area, being in the gray area where there isn't an easy answer to something. I think all of these aspects of us, they're our birthright. We have them, but a lot of us suppressed it. And I think that where we're headed in the future, when I'm trying to call in with my second book, which is called Season of the Witch,
Mhm.
is
Which I
that
love.
it's time for a homecoming to that. It's time
Mm.
for a reckoning with the fact that, oh, like I want women to have an aha moment of, huh, that resonates. And I didn't even realize I did that, but that sounds familiar. I think I did suppress this intuitive, witchy part of myself in order to survive. And it is now safe to come out of the broom closet. It is safe to claim this without apology, without shame, to basically say, I am intuitive. I do have a wide open antenna. I am a little witchy. I do pick up on things. I sense things. I feel things. And I'm no longer going to make self deprecating jokes about my interest in astrology. I'm no
Mhm.
longer going to pretend that this isn't a part of myself in order to say something sanitized and acceptable in the boardroom.
Mm.
That I'm going to start to own this part of myself and really let it be a compass as I navigate the decisions in my life.
Are all women witches?
I think so, but I think that um, I think we're all at a different place on a spectrum of knowing that about ourselves and embracing that. I think a lot of us are in conflict about this aspect of ourselves.
Well, what do we do, those of us that we might be witches? Well, what do we do when we live still in a very patriarchal world? You and I are in a, what's the best word to say it? I don't want to say bro science, but like science flexing world,
Yeah.
right? Oh, well, if it's not in a study, then it's not real. And, this experience that this particular patient's having in an exam room is completely discounted,
Yeah.
even though it's replicated God knows how many times, right?
Yes.
But it's still not quote unquote real. In fact, I shared on social and I'm fine sharing it again. I literally had a neurologist yell at me because I was advocating for the patient and he's like, "Well, I don't understand what you guys are doing. Like, what are you doing? Selling supplements? Like, why do you do it? What are you, just a therapist?" Like just totally trashing the field, trashing what we do.
Right.
And there's a lot of this, like, you do this, therefore it's not real, and you're in it for some other reason.
Oh,
When
yeah.
it's like, no, we are putting people forward on healing journeys, and we're trying to take the toolbox that we know that has been handed down over generations for thousands of years from very gifted people,
Yeah.
and trying to help modernize it in a way that is practical and realistic, but still within the, rough framework of science.
Yeah.
But I'm going to ask you, as a fellow physician and probably a fellow witch, is science everything? The way we understand science today?
So, and I have this like snarky response to the neurologist of like, no, you're right. We should all just be putting people on steroids
There
to
you go.
utterly
And
suppress
yeah,
their immune system.
right.
And we know how that story ends. And so I think that it's the training that we have and the moment we're in the world is to bow down and worship at the altar of science
Right.
and to say a randomized clinical control trial, that is the ultimate arbiter of truth.
Right.
And I'm not going to fully poo-poo it. Like, we love evidence.
And we
Evidence
need
is
some
nice. We
standards, right?
absolutely do, because
So
this was an improvement over a bunch of dudes sitting around and arguing by assertion and saying,
right,
I feel like it's this, so it's that.
right,
Let's do bloodletting,
right,
whatever it is.
right.
And so, yes, the spirit of the scientific method, testing our hypotheses, changing our management based on what the data shows us, the spirit of that is so good.
Mm-hmm.
Putting aside the fact that it's been corrupted systemically
Right.
with industry interests, putting
Right.
that aside,
Right.
that
Minor
minor issue,
details.
putting that
Yeah.
aside, I don't think it can answer all questions that matter to humanity. And I also think that we are too reliant on it.
Mm.
And I am always going to, I'm playing a long game with this because I'm going to keep trying to keep buy-in because I understand the cultural moment we're in,
Right.
evidence-based. So like my book, which is basically trying to say, um, like there's this whole other way of bringing truth and information forward that's not just the scientific method. There are like 400 scientific citations in this book, right? So I'm
Mm-hmm.
still going to point to the data, but I'm also trying to help us see that that is not our only measure of truth.
Mm.
It's not our only measure of reality that is useful. And I think for women in particular, we've had the experience of having our subjective anecdotal experience dismissed. I remember I went on birth control
Yeah.
pill and
That's
started crying every day and went into the prescriber and said, it's going well, but I think I'm crying every day. And she said, well, there's no evidence for that. Fill in, sweetie.
right.
And
Right.
and now there is. Now there is.
Yeah.
But I think we need to not suspend so much disbelief if something doesn't have evidence. Like the absence of
It
evidence
doesn't
is
mean
not
it's not
evidence of
real.
absence.
Right.
And I think that not everything that's real can be measured.
I love that answer. But let's go back to how we started. Anxiety, in your sort of macro description, is somebody being more connected to the environment and to their, immediate surroundings and even global surroundings, tapped into that collective consciousness, so to speak, right? Having that big, wide open antenna, maybe having a few physiological things that could be corrected simultaneously. And then we have women who already have a big, wide open antenna to begin with, and children, right? Children come in very receptive for the most part.
Yeah.
What would you tell women and children to do as they navigate through life and decisions in life and roadblocks and challenges and even good things in life, as they understand that they have this intuitive power, that they're feeling things that are real, that they're very visceral, and some are more so than the other, right? How do we, first of all, as parents, help navigate a child that might be like that, like my daughter, or as women, kind of own that to a certain extent and make it a
Mm.
superpower, to
Yeah.
use that word, rather than something that is seen as one of our weaknesses?
Yes. Rough draft. Like, I don't have these talking points ready, but like, let's navigate this in
Yeah.
real time
Yeah.
together. I think that the reclamation, the empowerment of like someone saying, oh, yeah, actually, I am intuitive. I'm even going to call myself a witch. To claim that, I think, is part of how we relieve the suffering around
I
this.
love that.
And then
I think that's like step one.
it's big because life is challenging,
Yeah.
but the suffering is usually created by our resistance to our circumstances
Yes. And by our unwillingness to listen to that intuitive voice.
and to flow with the way the current is directing us through our lives.
Mm.
So all of that resistance, like when we're not floating downstream, when we're not um, shoring up all parts of ourselves and we're fragmented, I think this is creating a lot of unnecessary suffering. So part of what we want to do is claim it that we're
Okay.
witches. Part of what we want to do is with that new worldview that this is perhaps that human existence is vastly beyond our comprehension. I even call that like a belief in magic. I say that a
Mm-hmm.
little tongue in cheek, a
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
little like completely serious.
Yeah.
A belief in magic, I think, helps a lot because then when circumstances arise that we don't want, that we wouldn't have asked for, that we don't like, we have this whole different framing for making sense of it. We start to see how things are sometimes in service of our growth, how there's sometimes divine timing and guidance in things that we even don't like. But
Mm.
I find that I suffer the most when I want to rail against reality and say, no, I don't agree with this outcome. I don't want this to go this
Hmm.
way. And of course, that's natural. We feel that with any loss, with any suffering, with pain. But the more I can start to see it as this is how it's unfolding, and can I surrender into and trust this unfolding? And can I even possibly make meaning from the unfolding? I find that that helps a lot.
Oh, I love that.
And where this really comes into play is with loss. And that's a major part of what I write about in Season of the Witch is that it was through losing my mom and then later my dad that forced my hand around what's your worldview, girl? Like
Mm.
you were raised in this kind of atheist New York City altar, like
Mm-hmm.
worship at the altar of science.
Mm-hmm.
Skepticism was a virtue. But then I got into yoga and I had a kind of diluted spiritual
Mm-hmm.
worldview of like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
but then it kind of forced me to put my penny down and make a call and say, do I believe that my mom is gone, that loss is absolute, or do I have an ongoing connection to her in some form?
Mm.
And I chose, originally it was just a choice, it was a choice to say, I want to have some ongoing connection to her. And over time, what I've experienced is that it's not even a choice. It's a knowing, it's an embodied experience of that. And that has enriched my life. And it has certainly eased the pain of grief,
Mm-hmm.
but it has actually blown open my worldview where things are in so much more technicolor
Mm.
and it gives my life more meaning and purpose. It, it, for me, it's been the hardest thing I've ever gone through, but it's actually been in certain ways the most important change in how I understand what this human experience is.
Wow. So profound. I have to ask you this question selfishly, even after that. Like we as mothers,
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing for us to accept the fact that we're intuitive and it's a power and we need to claim it. How do we manage our children? How do we manage those children that have that? How can we discern that this is a child that is built this way, wired this way, maybe more so than the other one, and to prevent them from a path of like needless suffering, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the screenings that or teachings that we as mothers could instill?
Oh man. I mean, parenthood is always so humbling and good at kicking
No
you in your
kidding.
teeth when you think you've got it
Yeah,
figured out.
no kidding.
Like, I wish I
The
could
hardest thing
say
ever.
normalize it,
Yeah.
but I've normalized witchiness and belief in magic so much that my daughter has reacted by going the other direction.
Yeah, I'm
So
sure. Yeah.
she's like, calls herself a physicist. And that's
Yeah.
cool. I love that.
Yeah.
We love girls in STEM. We
Right.
still do.
Yep.
Witches in STEM. But I think that they're always just going to be on their own journey. And can we stay really flexible and nimble and sort of sit beside them with it without too much
Mm.
weighing in? Because I think sometimes the way we can show up for someone is to normalize and support, but sometimes it's actually to like kind of like lock ourselves down
Not
a
say
little
too
bit
much.
and let
Yeah.
them
Yeah.
take their
Can we
ride.
identify a wide open antenna kid?
I think that, I mean, kids are so wide open, but yeah, and I think it often looks like things that we do a lot of correction around and shame around. I think kids that are suffering a lot. I think kids that are very dysregulated. I think kids that are having like bad behaviors. I
Mhm.
think those behaviors show us an unmet need. And I think that unmet need has a lot to do with what comes with so much sensitivity. So I think a wide open antenna gets a kid to be very prone to overstimulation. And then it shows up as bad behaviors and we correct the behavior. And I think we're missing
The root cause. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. This is incredible. I love this. So you have a book, The Anatomy of Anxiety, that's already out.
Mhm.
Your next book is coming, Season of the Witch. I can't wait to bring you back on so we can get into that in a deeper way. Where can people find you and connect with you?
The best place is Instagram. I'm at Ellen Vora, MD, and I pop on there every once in a while and just without much editing, talk to camera about whatever is
Love
coming
that.
through in the field.
I love that. And then my final question is, what makes you whole?
I love this question. And I'm rather than having like a really good answer, I'm gonna have the really honest answer.
I want the honest answer.
I'm where I am right now in my spiritual journey is what makes me whole is to recognize that I for decades suppressed a whole half of myself. And the more I bring that part of me back home and kind of say, tell me what you know, even when I'm inclined to feel a little shame or to want to apologize for those parts of myself, it's to shore up those pieces and say, like, this is all part of the organism. And so it's the right hemisphere insights. It's the gray area, ineffable woo woo parts of me that when I bring that back into the conversation, I have learned that that's what makes me feel whole.
So we could spend another hour talking about this, but I think you and I are on very similar journeys. I think that all successful, like patriarchally successful women today are on this similar journey, that they have checked the boxes in terms of education and credentialing and career success and monetary success and built businesses and done all this stuff, but are coming to the realization at some point, whether it's shortly after school, mid-career, post-career, whenever, that if we do not embrace that side of us, there is deep unhappiness and deep unrest. And a big part of being a woman is having, and I think a lot of us needed the credentialing for self empowerment,
Hmm.
right? So nobody could take advantage of us at the end of the
Hmm.
day, right? That's a lot of what drove my mom to force us. She's like, I don't want anyone to be in this position, you know?
Yeah.
But while we now have self-determination, we've also had some self-sacrifice.
Yeah.
And so I think the next wave for women, I hope, is that we can marry self-determination with self-fulfillment in a way that's powerful and beautiful, and then can transmit that to our children so that they know the model to follow. Have I done that? No, for my kids, right? Will I do that in the future? Yes, but I hope that's at least the gift that you and I can give the generations that are under us for sure.
That's right.
So, but anyhow.
There's a Joseph Campbell quote, came up in a book we read in a book club together.
Yes, yes, yes,
The
yes.
Maureen Murdoch's
Yep,
heroine's journey.
yep,
But the Joseph Campbell quote is, you've gotten to the top of the ladder and realized it was against the wrong wall.
right.
So maybe part of how we support our children is let them climb the ladder that they feel drawn to. But when they realize that it was against the wrong wall, can say, okay, let's regroup, let's
Yeah.
pivot, let's scoot the
That
ladder over here.
nimbleness and flexibility that you talk about.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, this has been amazing. Thank you for being here and
Thank you.
joining me. I adore you and love you, as you know. And for everybody who wants to follow Ellen, follow along. And her first book is incredible. We've read through that one. I can't wait for the next one, but we'll definitely be bringing you back. So thank you all for watching and listening. Thank you, Ellen, for being here
The
today.
feeling is mutual.
And I'll see you guys next time. Before you go, remember, healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in moments. If today's episode gave you one of those moments, subscribe and keep learning with me. The next video is right here, and it picks up right where this one left off.